Have you ever read a comic and went, man, this would make a great movie? Well, if you have, that's probably because it was meant to be a movie. This has been a trend in comics for a while. Screenwriter has a cool idea for a film, no studio wants to option it, but hey, there's those flippy book thingies with pictures. They'd be a great way to show off my script. I'll just find an artist, make a couple of changes, and Bob's your auntie. Don't worry, that joke will make sense in a minute. The Ballad of Sang reads like a screenplay turned into a comic. Even if that wasn't what happened, it's got the movie feel to it. You can tell at certain parts that the scene would play better in a film. I got a very Japanese vibe from the story, writing, and the art, and this Amazon summary pretty much confirms that. Quote, hit writer Ed Brisson and newcomer Alessandro Michele present an homage to Takeshi Miike's films with The Ballad of Sang, the story of a child assassin raised in violence and out for revenge after his master is murdered. When a mistake on the job brings the wrath of Don Michele down on him, Sang barely escapes with his life. While Sang swears revenge for his fallen mentor, every gang in the city mobilizes to return him to Michele, dead or alive. For those who don't know, Takeshi Miike is a prolific Japanese director. He's only been making films since '91 and already has over 100 films and TV shows to his name. Miike's style is bloody and dark. This isn't phony SJW dark where they pretend to be edgy and then worry about microaggressions. This is a real deal. Miike's film Ichi the Killer got banned in Britain. At a festival in Toronto, they handed out barf bags. His most recent film that Westerners might be familiar with is Blade of the Immortal, which is an adaptation of the awesome manga series by the same name. Another one would be 13 Assassins. That one has a slow build to an epic, bloody 30-minute samurai battle. Think the fight from Seven Samurai with amped up action and lots, and I mean lots, of blood. So this is the type of world Brisson built for The Ballad of Sang. Hyper-violent Grand Theft Auto style characters with a little touch of John Wick thrown in. That John Wick thing isn't the action, by the way. It's Sang's motivation, but I won't spoil that for you. With this kind of setup, you'd think this would be a perfect book. But it's not, really. The series is 5 issues long, but it feels rushed. We don't get enough of Sang's personality or character to really understand him, which makes the reveal at the end very weak. If I compare this to John Wick, we know more about John Wick than we do about Sang, and I'm just sticking with the first film. There's nothing wrong with not giving tons of backstory, but when it comes at the price of character development, it's a problem. The character Lucy has more character development than Sang, and Lucy is just a side bitch. That's a problem too, because halfway through the story we get into Lucy's past and it's genuinely interesting. It's almost like this should have been the Ballad of Lucy instead. The world building is interesting. Most of the gangs have themes: metalheads, punk rockers on roller skates, hipsters. This is one of those elements that would have worked much better if it had been fleshed out more or seen on film. In the comic, it just feels incomplete. Another tricky element is the tone. It's got this tinge of dark humor, but there are places where it gets very serious, and the tone shifts happen so quickly that it's difficult to tell what is and isn't supposed to be taken seriously. But before I dig into the story, let's talk about the art. Alessandro Michele has an interesting style. I like it, but I can easily see people not digging it. He's got a clear anime manga influence, but also a clear Western influence, and I think those two don't gel as well as they could. There are places where his brushwork style works well, and places where the loose lines break the flow. The action scenes work, although there are some places where we see the start and finish, but not the build-up, and it can leave you confused. Part of that may come down to the writing, but part of it is also the staging of the panels. Sometimes we need to see an anticipation panel, something to show the action is about to happen, and then the payoff panel. Overall though, Michele's work is good, at least to me. I could follow what was going on, the panel flow seemed okay, and the style itself was visually intriguing. When it works well, showing off Michele's quirky expressions and character designs in action. When it doesn't, it really doesn't. This hit or miss thing isn't a deal breaker for me, but it did take me out of the story a couple of times. The character design is the strongest part of Michele's style. Everyone has a different look. Michele doesn't limit himself to realistic proportions. I mean, look at this awesome take on Caitlyn Jenner, the character Lucy. Seriously, every time I saw this character, all I heard in my head was,
"Yo, he look like a man."
As for the story, it starts off with Sang going to take out a rival boss. We learn that Sang doesn't speak but writes notes. He wants to see the boss and the goon isn't having it, so Sang pimp slaps him. The goon takes him in, and Sang drops a note asking for the money owed to Don Michele, and the guy's pinky finger, for all the trouble. Well, you know how this works. The boss refuses, and Sang slaughters everybody. I can see some people being disturbed by seeing a kid kill people, but I read manga and watch anime, so I don't find this that bothersome. It is brutal, but it matches the Miike tone. The boss gives Sang lip, so instead of just taking the pinky, Sang cuts off all 4 fingers. When he gets home, he's asked by his master whether the guy was still alive, and Sang signs that he was. Then we hit the first bump in the comic. Instead of showing us the relationship the master has with Sang, the master tells Sang, and us, that he's more of a father to Sang than the boss is to his biological sons. We never see this relationship, or any other one for that matter. There's just one scene between them, and it doesn't even give us anything to work with. This is also the longest time we spend getting to know Sang. He goes to his filthy room, plays with some toys, reads a comic, and then goes to sleep. The filthy living conditions give away that the master isn't really the loving father that he claims to be, but it would have been better to get to see that by these two interacting. We don't have time for that though, because Dominicella shows up. He says the other boss died of blood loss, and now he's out of 50 grand. He kills the master and sends his goons after Sang. Sang struggles a little but manages to take out most of the guys. The biggest thing he does though is snatch Dominicella's arm, cuts it clean off, and escapes with it. Mincella is pissed. He wants his arm back, and from the way the scene plays out, it's difficult to tell if he wants it back because he wants to reattach it, or if he just wants to have it back. It's a weird kind of dark humor. It works, but it's confusing. Sang doesn't make it far though. He passes out in the alley, only to be picked up by Bruce Jenner's nobody named Lucy. Seriously, imagine waking up to that face. Sweetie, can we talk for a minute? Just real quick. Now, I know you're not used to being a woman yet, but just let me... The boobs are supposed to be on your chest, not your cheeks. They're called chesticles for a reason. Honestly, I bet his cheeks are bigger than his balls. So in a perfectly normal and innocent move, Lucy has stripped Sang down to his surprisingly clean undies just to wrap his side. I'm going to assume Lucy washed his clothes. You could have just given him clean underwear. I mean, the kid is wearing the same thing all the time. He's been out for days. You had plenty of time to buy fresh clothes. Just saying. After bribing Sang with food to get his name, Lucy goes to the corner store where she gets ambushed by the Vexed. That's with 3 X's, just in case you wanted to know. These are the metalhead biker gang that look like something right out of The Dark Knight Returns. This is another part where the tone shift just gets weird because up to this point, everything's been more or less real. Hyper violent, but real. And then we get the Vexed. And I'm so... what's the word? You know, that one when things don't make sense to you. Anyway, Lucy gets ambushed and the Vexed go to kill Sang. Turns out the store clerk ratted on Lucy. The fight goes badly for the Vexed. Very, very badly. By the way, he survives this. To the face. Flamethrower. Point blank range. To the face. Still breathing. Whining about his hair. I do love this part though when the guy is like, I can get a wig. And the other gang member says, false. It would be false. And you know what we do to false metal. And then cuts his head off with an axe that's actually an axe. Lucy and Sang make their getaway in the pussy wagon, and Sang explains why the gang is after it. The gang catches up and takes out the van. They're ready to kill the kid, and one of them asks Sang if he's got any last words, and the boy writes, "Eat my asshole." Now, I love the line and the scene, but let's just pause here to note that this kid must be a speedwriter or had that thing saved for a special occasion. I wish there was a scene of him scribbling down insults and then sorting through them, trying to figure out which one he wants to take with him. Like, eat my asshole or gargle my nuts. Which to choose, which to choose. Anyway, Sang stabs the guy and the rest of the gang flees, and Lucy pulls the guy's guts out to get him to talk. They find out that Donchella has sent every gang after the kid, so Lucy and Sang need to move. The Black Eyed Betties, a punk rock group of all-female roller skaters, show up and find a dead guy, ring up Donchella, and demand more money. We get this really lame joke. How do you get a one-armed man out of a tree? You wave at him. And then Minchella agrees to the new $1 million price tag. Lucy and Sang end up at a restaurant where she tells Sang about how bad a guy Minchella truly is. I won't spoil it, but it's pretty gruesome, although probably not as shocking to Sang considering what he's done. Conversation doesn't go far though. The Bettys show up and we find out that Lucy used to be part of the group, apparently the only male member, and that Lucy and Georgia, the leader of the group, may have been a couple. The Bettys start a fight and chase Sang and Lucy into a food locker. Lucy tells Sang not to kill anyone because they're former friends. Then one of the Bettys brings in the restaurant owner, and Lucy makes Sang stop since she doesn't want the guy harmed. This is the third bump in the story. It all becomes about Lucy and Georgia and the group's backstory. It's not bad, it's just that the hyper-violent, hyper-real world doesn't seem like the place where a bunch of people hell-bent on killing each other would just stop and talk it out. What makes it weirder is that the reason the Black-Eyed Bettys want the cash is to save a community center for girls. Why these fine ladies don't have any concerns for boys who are used and abused like Sang isn't mentioned. All the talking doesn't work though. The Bettys still take Sang, so it makes the scene kind of pointless. Even if they did change their minds, having characters sit and talk is boring in a visual static medium like comics. Anyway, the Bettys take Sang, but get stopped by the Dandies, a bunch of hipsters with Tommy guns. The Dandies take out the Bettys, burn their skates, and take Sang and call up Minchella, who wants to know about his arm. They didn't find it, so they torture Sang to find out where he hid it. Meanwhile, Lucy manages to talk the Bettys into helping her rescue Sang by giving the same speech that didn't work before. Georgia's argument is that Sang is a killer, which is true, and Lucy's argument is that he is made into a killer, which is also true. It's a fine discussion and all, but it feels out of place in this hyper-violent world. Violence is meted out in the most insane way. Hell, no one is even surprised that Sang is a badass killer. They're more annoyed that they can't beat him. So you'd have to wonder why anyone would care about him being trained to be a killer. But somehow Lucy's speech works, and the Bettys go to save Sang, who, as it turns out yet again, doesn't need saving. The head dandy and Lucy face off, and out of nowhere Sang comes in and does this. Yeah, that was awesome. Lucy makes the guy tell them where Minchella is hiding, but not before promising to call the guy an ambulance. Once he gives up the goods, the gang walks off, and dude is like, "You promised to call me an ambulance." So Lucy does that. She goes right up to his ear and says, "You're an ambulance." Sang takes the Bettys to his weapons stash, and then they storm Minchella's place. Sang torches Minchella's arm, and the dude loses his shit, and for the fourth time, there's a bump in the story. Up to this point, everything has been more or less realistic. Even with the weird 80s style futuristic biker gang outfits, they all still seem to be bound by mostly real world rules. So it's totally unexpected that Minchella turns into fucking Tetsuo. Seriously, he's got the arm with the stretchy powers and it makes no sense. Nothing else we've seen has anything like this. If there was something, just a hint of sci-fi, it'd have been fine. But having this is like having John Wick face off against Nemesis from Resident Evil. Doesn't matter though. Sang slaughters the guy and then explains, in writing, why he actually came after Minchella. He's not out for revenge for his dead master, but for something seemingly trivial to an adult. It's a moment that fits the character's age, but ultimately doesn't work because we haven't spent any time getting to know Sang and how he feels or thinks. He hasn't opened up to Lucy, doesn't share his thoughts and captions, and hasn't done anything other than try to get Minchella. This is a classic case of telling and not showing, and it kills what could have been a cool moment. I also think the moment would have been more powerful if the audience were in on the reveal. This is a John Wick moment I mentioned before. Imagine if instead of letting us know that Wick is hell-bent for Russian blood because of a stolen car and a dead dog from the start, the filmmakers waited until the end of the movie to tell you, letting you think the whole time it was about his wife. Rings hollow, doesn't it? That's what happens here. With John Wick, we get to see what his wife meant to him and what the dog represents. We need those first 10 to 15 minutes to care that he goes on a rampage. Take that away or put it at the end of the film and it feels like you've been tricked. That's what happens with the Ballad of Sang. It's a good idea, actually a damn good idea, especially if Minchella thinks the kid is coming for him for revenge. But it only works if the audience knows and cares about Sang's motives. If we don't know his motives or are tricked into thinking there's something different, the reveal doesn't work unless we truly care about Sang, and we never do because we don't know anything about him. The story ends with the community center getting the cash, which Minchella had at the ready, and Sang finally learning how to spell. Overall, I liked the Ballad of Sang, found it fun and bloody and quirky, but the tone shifts and the lack of character development and weak ending definitely hurt my opinion of the story. I think it would work much better as a film, where pacing and runtime would force Brisson to polish up the good parts and cut out the weak parts. The ending would definitely be changed because it's just not cinematic enough. If this was intended to be a comic, I'd say it needed to focus more on Sang so we understand his motives. It also helped to get a little more information about the child assassin thing. If Sang wasn't the only one we saw, which is kind of implied, it would work much better if we saw them. We need something to understand why these people don't bat an eye at a killer kid. This series is due out in trade in March, so if you're interested in checking it out, you can pick it up then or just find the single issues. I'm sure once the trade comes out, sites like InStock Trades will have it on discount. If you've read this series, let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. Thanks for listening.